Imagine for a second, you are walking through a city. It's bustling, the sun is out, the architecture is just magnificent. I mean, marble columns, paved roads, statues that look alive.
Incredibly civilized.
Right, it feels that way. But under that polished surface, you are walking on a fault line, a huge, jagged crack where two worlds are just grinding against each other. And we aren't talking geology here.
No.
We're talking about a culture war so intense, it makes, modern political debates look like a polite tea party.
It really is the ultimate clash of civilizations. You have this irresistible force of the Greco-Roman world.
And it's meeting the immovable object of Jewish tradition.
Exactly.
And usually when we learn about this period first century Judea, we get the sanitized version, the filled board stories or the dry textbook dates. But today, we are doing a deep dive into the real first century. We've got a stack of sources here that just strip away the stained glass.
And what they reveal is a landscape that, well, it reads more like a political thriller.
It really does. We're talking money laundering, hitmen, secret societies, and this huge philosophical battle for, really, the soul of the Western world.
And our mission today is to decode the environment that Yeshua, or Jesus, as most of us know him, actually stepped into. Because if you don't get the pressure cooker he was walking around in, you really miss half the story.
Totally. It wasn't just everyone is waiting for a Messiah. It was a powder keg. So let's unpack this. The sources, they describe this as a fundamental incompatibility.
Between Athens and Jerusalem.
Okay, so help me out here.
Yeah.
The Greeks were famous for integrating people. Alexander the Great conquers a place, he builds a gym, everyone learns Greek, and it's fine. Why couldn't the Jews and Greeks just get along?
Because for the Jewish people, getting along wasn't just, learning a new language. It meant participating in a lifestyle they saw as objectively evil. The Greeks were humanists, right? They celebrated the human form, human achievement.
But their morality was completely different from the Torah.
Vastly different. Give me some examples.
Well, the gymnasium. Let's start there. Every Greek city had one. It was the center of social life, politics, everything. But the word gymnasium comes from the Greek gymnos, which means naked.
Right. So you exercised and socialized in the nude.
Which, for a modest Jewish culture, is already a nightmare.
Oh, it's worse than just modesty. You have to remember, Jewish men carried the mark of the covenant circumcision.
So in a Greek locker room, that makes you a total outsider.
It was a sign of mutilation to the Greek aesthetic. The sources actually mentioned that the pressure to fit in was so intense that some Hellenized Jewish men underwent these painful surgical procedures to reverse the appearance of circumcision.
Ouch. That is a level of peer pressure I can't even comprehend. You're surgically altering your identity just to sit at the cool kids' table.
That's the level of cultural shame we were talking about, but it went deeper. It was about life itself.
What do you mean?
The Greeks practiced infanticide. It was standard family planning. If a baby was born weak or if it was a girl and you wanted a boy, you would just leave it on a hillside to die from exposure. And to the Jews, who were obsessed with family lines, sanctity of life, this was just barbarism.
So it's a total moral gridlock. But here's where it gets really interesting for me. The sources say this wasn't just about behavior. It was how they saw the universe. We have to talk about the Book of Enoch.
Ah, yes. The Book of Enoch. This is absolutely crucial.
Now, this book, it isn't in the standard Bible today. But in the first century, this was a bestseller, right?
Absolutely. It was widely read, considered scripture by a lot of groups, including the folks at Qumran who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls.
And it provided the why behind this whole culture war.
It did, because it deals with the gods. See, a Greek will look at a statue of Zeus or Apollo and see a divine protector. But the Book of Enoch offered this terrifying counter-narrative. It claimed these gods weren't just stories. They were literal entities.
Fallen angels.
The Watchers.
Exactly, who had rebelled against the Creator.
This is the part that just blew my mind. It says these Watchers, they didn't just show up. They taught humanity forbidden technology. That's right. They taught men how to make weapon swords and shields. They taught women how to use cosmetics and sorcery. So if you're a pious Jew and you're steeped in Enoch, Greek culture isn't just foreign.
It's demonic.
Yes, it is literally demonic.
That reframes everything. So when a Jewish person walks through a Greek market and sees a temple to Apollo, he's not seeing beautiful architecture.
He's seeing a headquarters for a fallen angel who is actively teaching humanity how to destroy itself.
It turns assimilation into spiritual treason. If you participate, you're not just being modern, you're defecting to the side of the demons.
Exactly.
So the philosophical stage is set. But history isn't just ideas, it's armies. Alexander the Great sweeps through, and this is where we see the conflict wasn't just Jew versus Greek.
No, it became neighbor versus neighbor. When Alexander showed up, the Jewish leadership in Jerusalem, they mostly just kept their heads down. But their neighbors, the Samaritans, saw an opportunity.
The rivals living just north of Jerusalem.
Right. They immediately flipped loyalties to get on Alexander's good side. They wanted to be the new favorites.
Classic I'm with the winner tactic.
And it backfired spectacularly. The Samaritans revolted later, Alexander crushed them, and he turned their capital city into a permanent Greek military colony.
So, smack in the heart of the land, in Samaria, you suddenly have a fortress of aggressive Hellenism.
A beachhead for the cultural invasion, which explains so much about the New Testament.
Right. When we hear about the Good Samaritan or Jews avoiding Samaria, it's not just, ethnic prejudice. It's because Samaria was ground zero.
It was the enemy next door. But that invasion, it started a civil war inside the Jewish community itself. You had the Hellenizers versus the Hasidim.
Okay, let's get some definitions. Who were these groups?
The Hellenizers were usually the urban elite, wealthy families in Jerusalem. They wanted to be players on the global stage. They spoke Greek, went to the theater.
And the gymnasium.
They saw their own ancient traditions as kind of backward and embarrassing.
They wanted to be citizens of the world.
And on the other side, you had the Hasidim. Now, don't confuse this with the modern movement, but the word means the same. The pious ones. These were the traditionalists. They refused to assimilate.
They stuck to the Torah, modesty, and they hated the Greek influence.
And the sources point out this was geographic, too. It's a city mouse versus country mouse dynamic.
But with swords.
Exactly. The Hellenizers controlled the cities and the lowlands. The Hasidim held the hill country Judea and the Galilee. Rough terrain, full of caves. Perfect for guerrilla warfare.
And this connects directly to Yeshua, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
The sources point out a detail we often miss. Yeshua recruited his followers exclusively from the Galilee.
The stronghold of the resistance.
Right. He didn't go to the Hellenized cities like Sepphoris or Tiberias for his disciples. He went to the fishing villages, the hills. The sources argue this places him firmly on one side of that divide. To the elites in Jerusalem, he wasn't just a preacher.
He was a dangerous radical from the backward hill country. Okay, so we've got the culture, the geography. Let's follow the money. Because every political thriller needs a corrupt establishment. Let's talk about the Sadducees.
The name comes from Saddukim, or righteous ones. But the common people probably saw them as the self-righteous.
They were the priestly aristocracy in Jerusalem. And they controlled the temple. Which I think we hear temple and we think big church. But the sources describe it more like a central bank.
That's a much better analogy. You have to understand, Judaism allowed only one temple for the entire planet. So you have millions of Jews all over the Roman Empire, Babylon, Egypt, Rome, all sending their tithes and the annual temple tax to this one specific spot in Jerusalem.
It's a massive funnel of wealth.
It's a money machine. One source calls it a casino. It just printed cash. There were rooms in the temple literally overflowing with gold and silver.
And sitting on top of this hoard are the Sadducees. And where there's that much money, Rome is going to be interested.
Oh, absolutely. The Sadducees were, for all intents and purposes, collaborators. The Romans needed someone to keep the locals in check and the economy flowing. The Sadducees were happy to play ball to keep their wealth and status.
And the sources say the position of high priest was complicated.
Complicated is a very polite word. It was for sale. You'd pay a huge bribe to the Roman governor, and boom, you get the robes.
So it's not a holy position, it's a political appointment.
Purely transactional.
Yeah.
And this corruption bled into their theology. The Sadducees are famous for denying the resurrection of the dead.
Right. And usually we're told that's because they were strict literalists. It's not explicitly in the first 5 books.
That's the textbook answer. But the sources suggest a political motive. Think about who they're trying to please.
The Romans and the Greeks.
Exactly. Greek philosophy, Platonism especially, found the idea of a physical body coming back to life to be repulsive. So by denying the resurrection, the Sadducees were making Judaism seem more harmless, more philosophical to the empire.
They were sanitizing their religion to keep their bosses happy.
And this changes everything about that scene where Yeshua overturns the tables in the temple, right?
Completely. I always just pictured him being annoyed at the noise, the commerce.
But it wasn't about selling pigeons. When he flips those tables, he is attacking the banking system of the collaborator class. He is striking at the wallet of the Roman puppet government. That is a revolutionary act.
And that explains the swift reaction. You mess with theology, maybe you get a debate. You mess with the money flow to Rome.
You get crushed.
Speaking of crushing, let's talk about the Romans. The Greeks tried to seduce the Jews with culture. The Romans just brought the boot.
The Roman reality was brutal. We tend to romanticize the empire, the aqueducts, the law and order. But for subject people like the Jews, Rome was a nightmare. They were sadistic. Execution was public entertainment, and they were masters of divide and conquer.
Like the British Empire later on. Find the cracks and drive a wedge in.
Precisely. The Romans would find local factions that hated each other and just stoke the fire. Jews versus Samaritans. Perfect. Let's keep them fighting so they don't fight us. Sadducees versus Pharisees. Even better.
But an empire that big needs more than violence. It needs an ideology, some kind of glue. And the sources say that glue was Platonism. How does that work? How does high-level philosophy run an empire?
This is so key. The empire was too big, too diverse. You had thousands of local gods, a river god here, a mountain god there. How do you unify that?
I have no idea.
Platonism offered a framework. It said there is one unknown distant source, or the one.
Okay, like the CEO in the sky.
Right. And below the one, there are many lesser eons or emanations that trickle down. So Rome could go to your local river god and say, great, keep worshiping him. He's just a middle manager for the one. It allowed for a unified religious structure.
Except for the Jews.
Except for the Jews. They refused. They said, no, our God isn't a middle manager. He is the one, and he demands exclusive loyalty. But there was an even deeper clash, spirit versus matter.
What do you mean by that?
Platonism taught that the physical world is flawed. It's shadows and dust. The goal of life is to escape the body and become pure spirit. The body is a prison.
So I'm a soul trapped in a meat suit.
Exactly. But Judaism teaches God created the physical world and called it good. Matter matters. And that's why the idea of a bodily resurrection was so offensive to a Roman mindset.
To them, it sounds like being thrown back into the prison you just escaped.
Right. So you have this total gridlock, and then you have the guys enforcing Roman rule on the ground, the tax farmers.
We usually call them tax collectors, which sounds so bureaucratic. Tax farmer is much more evocative.
And more accurate. It was a franchise model. You'd buy a license from Rome to collect taxes in, say, Jericho. You pay Rome a flat fee up front. Then anything you collect above that fee
is yours to keep. Oh, I see the problem.
You are literally incentivized to be brutal. The more you shake people down, the more you make. They were licensed thugs, traitors.
Okay, this brings us to probably the most controversial part of the sources. We have to talk about Paul, Saul of Tarsus.
The material we have has a very intense take on how he was seen by the traditionalists.
It does. The source describes Paul as the archetypal Epikuros.
Epikuros, that's a heavy word. What does it mean?
It comes from the name Epicurus, the Greek philosopher. In Jewish tradition, an Epikuros is a heretic, specifically a Jew who has adopted Greek wisdom and turned away from the Torah.
So from the perspective of the Hasidim, the group that James and the Jerusalem church belonged to Paul was the ultimate outsider.
Because he was trying to bridge the very gap that they were desperately trying to keep shut. And the prime example the source gives is the meat debate. Food sacrificed to idols.
Which always seemed like such a minor issue. Like, who cares about the menu? But based on our Enoch discussion, this is actually huge, isn't it?
It is everything. In the Roman world, almost all meat in the marketplace had been ritually offered to a god, to an idol, before it was sold.
So Paul's argument was what? Paul argued that since idols are nothing, a very Platonic view, just wood and stone, eating the meat doesn't matter. It's just protein. He's using Greek logic to navigate the world.
But James and the apostles in Jerusalem did not agree.
Strongly disagreed. They held the traditional Enoch view. Idols represent demons. So if you eat that meat, you are participating in a demonic ritual. You are sitting at the table with fallen angels. It is not nothing.
It's treason against God.
It is.
So this wasn't about dietary rules. It was about the nature of reality. Is the idol a harmless statue or a portal for a demon?
And that debate highlights the massive rift. Paul represented the Hellenistic approach assimilation philosophy. James and the traditionalists represented separation and purity.
It really paints a picture of a fractured world. You've got Greek culture pressing in, the Roman boot on everyone's neck, the wealthy collaborators selling out the priesthood, and then this rural pious movement trying to hold the line.
And into all that chaos walks Yeshua. And understanding this landscape, it changes how you see him. He wasn't just floating through some neutral background talking about being nice.
No, he was walking through a minefield. He was recruiting from the resistance. He was attacking the collaborators' money supply. He was operating in a world where culture war literally meant life or death.
The sources want us to see that the actions of these people, they stop looking like abstract religious rituals and start looking like desperate moves in a high-stakes game of survival.
It's all about power, money, and identity. Which brings us to the so what. Why does this deep dive matter to us 2,000 years later?
I think it matters because we are still living in the wreckage of this collision, and the sources, they leave us with a final, pretty provocative thought to chew on.
Okay, hit us with it.
The sources suggest the Greeks versus Jews conflict never really ended. It just changed form.
Right.
The Roman Empire eventually adopted a form of Christianity, right?
Right.
But in doing so, they infused it with Platonism. The Book of Enoch was suppressed, kicked out of the canon. The demon worldview was downplayed in favor of clean philosophical abstraction.
So are you suggesting Athens won?
That is the question the sources pose. If the lens through which the Western world views religion was shaped by Greek philosophy, how much of what we think we know about biblical history is actually just Greek thought in disguise?
Did we unknowingly let the Trojan horse into the church? Wow. That's a lot to think about. That idea is going to keep me up tonight.
It's the question that keeps the deep dive interesting.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks for listening, and keep questioning the narrative.
See you next time.